Being 11 o'clock, we'll get started. So first, thank you all for coming. My name is Stephen Tupper, Transportation Program Manager at the Cape Cod Commission. I have other commission staff as well here that we may have some discussions later. I want to start off with a couple housekeeping items. First, I wanted to let folks know that this meeting is being recorded by the town of Harwich for their YouTube channel. So you are being recorded. If you have any concerns with that, please let me know. But the purpose is so that folks who couldn't make it here today can still access the meeting, and we'll be sharing the link with folks as well after. I also wanted to ask, is there anyone else in the audience that's going to be doing audio or video recording today? Looks like we have an additional video recording here. Okay, very good. So you guys are in candid camera, just to let you know. But shouldn't have any issues with that. Just want to get that out there. So I'll give you a brief introduction of the presentation. It'll be about 20 minutes in length for the presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, discussion at the end. The purpose of this session is really to hear from you folks. So I'll go through the technical content, but then really want to hear what everyone who came out here today has to say. So again, we're going to be talking about the Route 6 safety project, looking at ramp and shoulder design. So again, I'm from the Cape Cod Commission. We're conducting this planning study, but we're doing it on behalf of Mass DOT, who owns Route 6 and maintains Route 6. So the purpose of this study is really to do some initial outreach, put some ideas out there publicly. If you like some of the things you hear today, great, I want to hear about it. If there's things you don't like, that's equally important. Really, this is supposed to be a very early planning look to give Mass DOT some feedback about what folks in the community think about these potential changes. So again, this is a planning level design. We're not getting into the engineering level detail. It's really very early in the stage. We want to hear from you folks. So again, we'll go through the presentation and then go into Q&A. If there are any clarifying questions as we go through that are brief in nature, I can certainly help with those. But if you could just please hold your feedback and more detailed discussion for the end. We have some guiding questions so we can really get to the heart of the level of support on some of these projects. So first, just to set the context, our study area is quite large, encompassing Route 6 from the canal up to the Orleans Eastham Rotary, about 36 miles in length. So given the length of the corridor, we're going to be pretty high level on our discussion today. There'll be some more details in the study report itself. We're specifically looking at each of the interchanges from 1C, also known as the Christmas tree shop exits, and exit 12. So we'll be talking about each of those interchanges along the corridor, as well as the corridor itself. So a little bit of background in terms of how we got here today. So for folks who have been driving this through the years, I'm sure it's no surprise there are some design challenges with Route 6. Through the years, there's been a number of efforts to look at potential fixes. One of those I'll highlight is a 2013 study conducted by the Commission, looking specifically at some issues with hydroplaning we were seeing. There's certainly some areas where there's some significant water pooling, and we were seeing some crashes related to hydroplaning. So that's just an example of one of the studies done over the years. And there's certainly well-documented crash history in terms of Route 6 ramps, particularly in the town of Harwich. I know there's a lot of folks, many of them in this room, who have been for years advocating for some improvements to the ramps on Route 6. So one hope is that with a documented report documenting a community process, that some of these efforts to make improvements on ramps will be a little easier down the road, working with the state. So I certainly want to support the municipalities in their efforts to make improvements in their town. And this report is hopefully documenting some of those challenges. And finally, more of the technical side, this is under the umbrella of what's known as the Cape Cod Unified Planning Work Program. In simple speak, that's the scope of work for studies we do each year. The funding for this comes from Federal Highway and from Mass DOT. Really, they engage Cape Cod Commission as an outreach arm so that we can go out to the communities, have these discussions in advance of any potential projects. Again, we are not proposing any projects. Today is really just a planning session to hear feedback on potential changes. So what is the purpose of this study? First, we took a look at the existing conditions. This was the technical analysis, looking at traffic volumes, looking at interchange geometries, looking at crash history. So we've done all that technical analysis. We've also looked at areas where MassDOT may be repaving in the future. Certainly when they're out there, it's great to get improvements done. I know that's worked great in some cases not as much as towns would have hoped, but hopefully this will aid that process going forward. Certainly there's a project on the horizon in Barnstable, and if there's some potential changes out of this, hopefully it could be incorporated in that project. And really this last bullet point is the focus of what we're talking about today. We'll be showing some of these potential future changes. We really want to understand from the community what sort of feeling folks get seeing those changes. We We've already got a number of comments via email and phone, so I continue to accept those. Certainly want to talk to people in any way that they're able to engage. Thank you everyone for coming here today, and for those watching on TV, there'll also be a listening session tomorrow later in the day at 5 p.m. at the Cape Cod Commission offices. So multiple ways to get involved. We really do want to hear from the public. So with that, I'll jump into the technical portion of the presentation today. For ease of discussion, I'll split discussion between the ramp locations and then the segments in between the ramps. So we'll focus just on the ramps today. And even more focused than that, we're really looking at the on and off ramps. I know there's also some challenges once you get off the ramps, getting onto local roadways. Some places have recently added traffic signals, some places may need them. But the focus today is really the ramps and what can be done with the design of the ramps to improve safety. So first, we took a look at ramp crashes. These are particularly crashes that somehow involve the vehicle accelerating or decelerating on or off the ramp. There are also a lot of rear-end collisions. Certainly, as we've seen with exit 10 and 11, some of the turbulence on the ramps backs up traffic, and then you get rear-end crashes. So these are crashes somehow relating to operations at the ramps themselves. It's a little hard to see on the screen, but hopefully the handouts show the difference a little better. Some of these darker circles here are injury crashes. Certainly seeing a good number of injury crashes at exit 10 in particular. But you can see the challenge goes throughout all of the ramps within the study area. The challenges at each of the locations. So after looking at the crashes, we took a technical look at the ramp design. And the coloring again here is a little challenging, but the handouts may help. A red, green, yellow in terms of the amount of length that there is currently to accelerate or decelerate compared to what is standard based on current industry standards. For the most part, ramp lengths are well below what we would recommend in terms of a safe operation. There's a few locations that have been recently improved, such as some of the ramps at exit 5. So those are up to standards, and a few other places are up to standard, but for the most part, they're well below what would be current design standards. So this is where you feel very uncomfortable trying to merge on or decelerate. There's a technical reason for it, is that you don't have enough length to do it. So this is simply documenting where some of the worst locations are. You can see the challenges on many of the ramps here. This is one of the things that will feed into the analysis of where improvements would be most valuable. So just a quick graphic here of what a typical ramp looks like. I'm sure you're all very familiar, but just to orient a few features that we'll be discussing here. So this is the Route 3, Exit 3 on-ramp. So as you see here, there's a short section where you have a full width of a car, and then essentially you get to a point where your car can't fit there anymore. That's where we assume you're merging into traffic. So in this case, there's really not enough of that area where you can have a full car length. Should extend well beyond here where you could slowly get up to speed and then more easily merge into traffic. If folks are going 55, if they're obeying the speed limit, maybe a little faster. Certainly a challenge if you're a low-speed vehicle trying to enter the travel stream. So that's why we would generally like to see a longer ramp length here. One other thing I will point out is some of the challenges. We'll get into those in more detail. Drainage structures usually located here. So while it may seem very simple to just add a little more pavement, and in some cases it is, when you start to run into drainage structures, that's where it becomes much more of an involved and costly project. Not to say it can't be done, we just have to have the resources and plan for those sort of challenges. So to speak specifically to some of those challenges that would be encountered in extending ramps, there are overpasses and underpasses near many of the interchanges. Those weren't actually as big of an impediment as I thought initially going in. Most of them have just enough room to still squeeze the two vehicles by, and then you can extend the ramps beyond that. There are a few locations where the bridges would provide a challenge in terms of extending the ramps. Again, as I mentioned, drainage structures, not a deal breaker, but add to the cost and complexity of projects. I know specifically with relation to exit 10 and exit 11, this is one of the reasons that Mass DOT wasn't able to extend the ramps as part of their repaving project. The drainage work would have been too extensive to do as part of the repaving according to Mass DOT in those cases. A couple other obstacles, guardrails. In some places there is enough area where you can get a little more pavement. In some places it really does constrict. In a few locations there's topography that's challenging. The road drops off pretty quickly, so it'll be a bit of a challenge to extend the ramps there. But taking all those things into consideration, we started to mock up what would what it would look like to have improvements at these ramps. So I'll highlight one particular location here to kind of orient you to what these improvements would look like, but this is pretty typical for each of the locations. This one in particular is exit 3. So right now today, when you're coming up, exit 2. Right now when you're coming up on exit 2, you have about 400 feet before you have to join the traffic stream. That's really not a lot of time to get up to speed and join the traffic. Design standard would be closer to 1,000 feet to have that time to safely accelerate and smoothly join into the traffic stream. So what you can see here highlighted in yellow, this is the additional pavement that would be needed to bring this ramp up to standard. So on the scale of transportation's projects, it's a relatively small paving job, and you can see in terms of the impacts, pretty much limited to areas that are already fully disturbed. They're mostly graded shoulders. So in this area, going from 400 feet to 1,000 feet for an acceleration lane. Similarly on the deceleration lane, I know particularly on exit 2, you have to slow down pretty quick before you hit that curve. So this would just be adding a little more pavement here to give you more time to have that deceleration. So again, this is an example of one location, but this is pretty typical in terms of the improvements that you would see at each of the ramps. So one thing that we were asked to do in our study was to quantify how much pavement would need to be added at each of these ramp locations. So we did an analysis very similar to this, very planning level look at the interchanges, and looked at each of the locations. And what we were really trying to do was understand where these locations could be improved to get some safety benefits. So we've talked about the substandard conditions, we've talked about the crashes. Very simply what we're trying to do is increase acceleration and deceleration lanes to improve safety and traffic flow. So that's kind of the basic premise of these. So then looking at each of these locations, again, this is in the handout, this is roughly the amount of pavement that would need to be added to bring ramps up to condition. You'll see some locations don't have any symbol. Those ones are already up to standard, so we wouldn't need to add any pavement. There are a few locations where you actually don't need any additional pavement. You just need to change the markings. So those would be the low-hanging fruit that we usually refer to. There's actually some shoulders that already exist at these locations. It's really just changing the line to bring things up to standard. And there are a few locations that will require a bit more pavement. Those would be in the darker blue colors there. So I know it's tough to conceptualize what a 5,000 square feet looks like. So we'll jump back to that example at exit 2 and tell you exactly what the square footage would look like at each of those locations. So at exit 2, this is one of the largest locations in terms of what you would need to add for pavement. That's about 64,000. So that was kind of on the high end of a project. This is one of the smaller projects at 3,000 square feet. You'll note on the last slide, there are a number of them that are actually less than 1,000 square feet of pavement. It's really not a whole lot of pavement needed to bring things up to standard. So that's all in terms of ramps. Are there any clarifying questions on ramps before we get on to shoulders? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that 1,000 square feet. Is that the standard, or is that less than the standard?
And just to repeat the question to make sure everyone hearing can hear. So the 1,000 square feet in terms of acceleration,
Or 1,000 feet.
1,000 linear feet
Yeah.
would bring it up to standard at that location.
It would.
The actual length varies depending on the entry speed and the speed of the vehicles, but for that particular ramp, 1,000 feet is roughly what is needed based on current standards. So bring it up to current standards with the added pavement shown here. So thank you. And there'll certainly be opportunity for more questions at the end if it pops into your head. So those are ramps. Now we'll move on to particularly looking at shoulders. So shoulders provide a number of important traffic functions in terms of controlling runoff. If you've got puddling, you'd rather have it in the shoulder than in the travel lane. It gives an opportunity for folks to pull over for emergency vehicles coming through the corridor. If there's a breakdown, it gives an opportunity to get out of the road. So these are some of the reasons that we would be looking at shoulders. Now we'll walk you through the technical analysis in terms of what exists for shoulders. So a quick question that I won't put anyone on the spot here, but think about when you drive to the corridor today, where are there shoulders along there? Most people don't think automatically, but there actually is a good stretch of roadway where there are shoulders already. So between exit 6 and exit 9 on the eastbound side, there is a shoulder, and that's very similar to what we would be proposing in other segments if these proposals were to move forward. But aside from that one segment where there's a shoulder on the eastbound side, there are no shoulders of significant length on the entire 36-mile corridor. So I'll show you some pictures of what it looks like, although I'm sure you're very familiar with it. So this is the first segment, and each of these are looking west, looking towards the canal. But between the canal and exit 6, you got 12-foot travel lanes and then an unpaved shoulder. So you can see the shoulder here. For the most part, they're graded so that folks could get off the roadway if they needed to get out of the way of an emergency vehicle or breakdown, although the condition of those certainly varies. Some places it's pretty comfortable to pull off, some places you're going to be bumping around a little bit. So that's what exists today, really the same condition on both sides from the canal to exit 6. So this is a very typical look of that segment of roadway. The segment between exit 6 and exit 9 is where you get some different looks on the two sides of the highway. So this is a look at each of those. So on the westbound barrel, again looking towards the west, just an unpaved shoulder. But on the eastbound barrel, we do have a paved shoulder up to 10 feet in width, which is what we would be looking for this stretch of roadway. And that extends the entire area there. So when we talk about these proposed improvements, we talk about it conceptually here. If you drive and look at that segment of roadway, that's exactly what it would look like. So if you want to get a sense of what the rest of the corridor would feel like with shoulders, it would feel like what it does today between exit 6 and 7. I know there's been a lot of concerns about this giving it a more urban feel, so certainly a very valid concern. So I would encourage folks who are interested to drive this segment and think about think about the cross section. That's what we would be looking to do. It does look a little narrow from this perspective. I promise it is 10 feet in width. And as a brief anecdote, I actually had a flat tire on this segment, and I was very happy that there was a paved shoulder there. I was able to get over and change the tire, so that was very helpful there. Unfortunately, there was a recent incident on the other side of the roadway here where a woman broke down, was trying to get off the road to do some vehicle repairs, and actually was struck and killed. So that's the levity of the situation here. It's really a challenge to try to get off the road in some of these conditions. So certainly emergency vehicle access and breakdown vehicles, important to think about here. And the final segment close to home for this location anyway is the 2-lane section between exit 9 and the rotary. So a very different character, of course, given the cross section, but in terms of the shoulder, it's similar, 5 to 10 feet unpaved. With a recent repaving project, they've done a pretty good job of making it a uniform shoulder, although again that degrades over time. So again, we're looking at three separate segments. Based on the feedback I've heard already, there may be different interest from the public in terms of what they would like to see in those different segments. So that's certainly fine to have different opinions in each of the segments. So one other thing we looked at is constraints to improving shoulders. So certainly where there's wetland issues nearby the roadway, something that would require further investigation. And also guardrails. If there's guardrails close to the road, that may impact the ability to add a paved shoulder. Although for the most part, and bear with me as I flip back a slide here, for the most part the guardrails are offset enough that you could put that paved shoulder right next to the guardrail. That's what you'll see on the segments that do have paved shoulders. So there's a few specific instances where the guardrails impede, but for the most part there actually is enough room already to add the paved shoulder right up to the guardrail. So with those constraints in mind, here are some proposed potential cross sections based on what's there existing, to what it would look like with paved shoulders. So in your handout you'll see these red circles. So essentially on this section from the canal to exit 6, we'll be taking the unpaved portion of shoulder and paving it. So we have a 10-foot width of paved shoulder. So pretty straightforward project from a transportation perspective, but certainly curious what folks think about the change to the roadway there. On the segment between exit 6 and exit 9, again, one of the barrels already has a paved shoulder, so we could potentially be adding a paved shoulder just to the other side, so you'd have the same design on both sides of the roadway. And then finally, the segment between exit 9 and exit 12 would be paving the unpaved shoulders on each side of the roadway there. Certainly changing the look of the roadway here, so curious what folks think about the safety benefit versus other potential impacts. There is a quantifiable safety benefit to adding shoulders, so it varies based on the segments here, as they have different cross sections today. But in general, on the two segments here with no shoulders, we would expect about a 13% crash reduction just by adding the shoulders. One area this pops up frequently is shoulders. Paved shoulders are an opportunity for folks to get out of the way if there's a potential incident. So if there's something going on, you can quickly maneuver over to that paved shoulder and possibly avoid the collision, where right now doing so you may lose control of your vehicle. so that provides an opportunity to potentially avoid crashes. A little less of a quantified benefit in the midsection because, again, there already is a paved shoulder on one side. So besides the reduction in crashes, some other considerations in terms of impacts of shoulders. Again, emergency vehicles, much easier for folks to get off the side of the road and emergency vehicles to move through. Disabled vehicles, a much safer condition there. Snow removal, certainly it's easier to begin pushing snow off if you have that space. And stormwater management, an important consideration in some very particular segments where we do see puddling right in the roadway, and that's a real problem in terms of hydroplaning crashes. So the ability to get that off into the shoulder is a much better way to manage the stormwater. But we do want to balance that versus community character considerations. Certainly this would involve adding a significant amount of pavement when you're talking about the length of the project, and potentially some tree clearing. I know this is an important topic to many. There's really likely very little tree clearing involved in this. The paved shoulder is part of what is currently the clear zone, which goes from the edge of the travel lane. So there's not really a significant amount of additional clearing, but at particular locations where there are currently encroachments into the safe zone, there may be some tree clearing required. So you want to make that clear up front. These sort of details would come out in the design process for a particular project, where they can look at the details of what's being proposed. So at this level, it's comfortable to say that the tree clearing will be minimal, but if a project were to move forward, we'd have much more detail on what that would entail. So next steps, again, continue to get the public feedback and share it with Mass DOT. There's a potential to move projects forward in two ways. One would be part of repaving projects that are already planned. So if there's ability to add a little bit of shoulder in areas where they're repaving, that's certainly a possibility. You could also have a dedicated safety project. So particularly with some of these ramp locations, we could potentially package a few of the locations together and get a project just focused at fixing some of the ramp challenges. And I do want to highlight this round of outreach is not the last opportunity for the public to weigh in. Again, this is the planning level, very early stages. If a project were to move forward, if the state is ultimately proposing to, say, add paved shoulders, there would be additional public outreach specifically tied to that project, where they'd be able to show exactly what changes are proposed, what the impacts are, and give the opportunity to weigh in on those projects. So this would not be the last chance for folks to engage on this discussion. By that being said, this is an important point in time to pause and start to listen to the community in terms of what is supported. So in particular, we're interested in the level of support for improvements at the Route 6 ramps, if there's any priorities that folks in this room have in terms of which ramps they experience regularly and feel like they have the most challenges. And then on the shoulder side, we're curious the level of support for adding paved shoulders on all of these three segments. Maybe you universally support shoulders on all three, maybe you don't want to see paved shoulders anywhere, or maybe your opinion varies by segment. Those are all perfectly fine. So with that, I would like to open it up to the public to give an opportunity for feedback here. We'd also entertain any questions. So the only thing that I would ask is that if you could, and I apologize, I know it's a bit of a challenge, but if you could come up to the mic, it would help to capture the audio for the recording. So I'll call on folks one at a time if you wouldn't mind coming to the mic. Yes, sir, you're first.
I've got a statement and I also have a question. I'll ask the question first. You've gone over next step. Thank you, by the way, for doing this, okay, first of all, on behalf of DOT and on behalf of us, okay, as people who experience, I'll say experience, and have experienced it for many, many years, the joys and the otherwise of Route 6. So thank you very much for doing that. Okay. First question is you're in information gathering phase now, okay, and you said there may be future meetings. Does either you and or Mass DOT have any sense of when there might be some response to this that's tangible, other than collecting information and planning? Do we have any? I mean, are we talking a decade, or do we have any sense of that at all?
Great question. So it's most likely that the tangible results will happen in small segments. Right. So right now there is a project under design for repaving in Barnstable. I actually saw folks out surveying this week on Route 6 in Barnstable. So that project is the nearest in terms of the time horizon. So depending on the outcome of this study, I would expect there would be some discussion relative to that repaving in Barnstable. That would happen within the next year or two. So that's the nearest tangible result.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to read this, and then I'll provide it to whoever on your staff, okay?
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Wheeler. I live on Woodland Road in Harwichport and have been driving on Route 6 for over 50 years, both eastbound and westbound. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts on safety benefits and potential impact of adding paved shoulders and extending acceleration and deceleration lanes along Route 6. As mentioned earlier, I've been driving Route 6 for over 50 years. Through those years, I've observed numerous projects designed to enhance the safety of the Mid-Cape Highway. Although several have generated the desired benefits, I believe that adding paved shoulders and extending acceleration and deceleration lanes on many exits would be beneficial to all of us. Although the state has undertaken projects to improve highway drainage, significant ponding, and I hadn't seen this before, so I'm going to come back and confirm what you're saying. Although the state has undertaken projects to improve highway drainage, significant ponding on the highway still exists in many, many locations. This ponding occurs even during moderate rainfall and results in pools that promote hydroplaning and loss of driving control. I believe this phenomenon is caused by an insufficient distance between the outside lane edge and the roadside curb. I'm not sure what the technical word is for that little incline. I know what it's there for, an insufficient distance between that outside line and that curb. In many instances, this condition has forced me to move toward the center of the highway, the high point, thereby inhibiting traffic flow and also safety, frankly. I believe this problem would be further minimized or eliminated with paved shoulders and the movement of drains to the new shoulders. Key point. I also support the extension of acceleration and deceleration lanes on certain exits to enhance safety. Through the years, I've traveled the Merritt Parkway in Connecticut. Although a scenic highway, it has suffered countless accidents from entrance and exit ramps that are of insufficient length and turning, such as we have now in Exit 2. We've had for years and years and years. We have a comparable situation here in the Mid-Cape. An example would be the Exit 10 westbound entrance ramp. Entering the traffic flow requires significant acceleration from a stationary position. And you also, by the way, as a subtext here, you have to watch the person in front of you because we've seen the rear enders coming on Exit 10 and other entrance ramps as well. Entering the traffic flow requires significant acceleration from a stationary position. Many energy-efficient cars with low horsepower or torque can have trouble accelerating to safely enter traffic flow. Further, the eastbound deceleration lane on Exit 10 requires quick deceleration into the sharp turn to exit the highway. I'm just using these as examples, okay? Further extension of the deceleration would enable drivers to exit the highway more safely. I hope that the proposed enhancements to the Mid-Cape Highway undertaken in a timely fashion, hence my question, to increase the safety of all who travel this critical transportation link. Thank you again for the opportunity to share my thoughts on these two issues.
Thank you very much.
So who do I?
Just leave it right there. Anyone else who'd like to speak today? This woman here, and then we'll get to Jane next.
Hi, Sandra Pastze. I live off of Exit 11, which seems to be similar to Exit 10 that we just went over. Besides that, they were just repaving this summer at night, and they left that rumble strip with those terrible reflectors that seem to pop off and go all over the side of the road. Why can't they put a guardrail in the middle? It would be better protection against people traveling from one lane to the other, which probably means they're impaired, but I don't see why they couldn't have handled that while they repaved. Is there a reason?
Certainly. So that's a great point about the potential for guardrail in the middle of the two-lane section.
Yep.
It has been discussed in the past. You know, there's been folks on both sides of the discussion. I know one important consideration has been emergency responders. Putting that physical barrier between them can be a challenge if you need to respond to an
But
emergency.
further down on the highway, they do have the guardrails, and there are areas every so many feet or miles where that you can turn around and get to an emergency. And I know Harwich has a lot of emergency vehicles. One day I saw 3 of them leaving. I didn't know we had 3, but they were all headed towards the hospital, and it's a major problem. Some people obviously aren't paying attention and don't look out for them, and this could, you know, result in many more fatalities on the highway. And my other issue, what was I going to say now? Oh, besides no shoulder, that would really help if every exit going down to the hospital could have a paved shoulder. Emergency vehicles would have an option, especially in the summer. Traffic is terrible. And I see this as being done a lot quicker than you're planning, because we travel to New Jersey, and I never thought I'd say this, but they did something right. They added to the New Jersey Turnpike 2 truck lanes for 25 miles in each direction. They had to take the bridges overpass down because they were not wide enough, and they did everything so quickly. We were amazed. I thought, well, we're never going to see this in our lifetime, but somehow they did it really well. So that might be an option for some referrals, but that's it.
Thank you very much for your comments. And next.
Good morning. My name is Jerry Beltis, Chairman of the Traffic Safety Committee here in Harwich. I want to commend you and your staff for putting together this presentation. It's much more than I anticipated. I am one of the movers of the off-ramp on exit 10, and I've been talking to you, pleading, for many years. In my minutes going back to 2007, there was a note there, we were speaking to your predecessor, Glenn Cannon, and then going back to 2006 with Tim Besh. Is that how you pronounce it?
Correct.
So this has been on our radar for quite a few years. So I was asking Link earlier last year if there was, Link Hooper, the director of the Highway Department, or DPW actually, if there was any way that they could improve the off-ramps, on-ramps on 124 and 137 when they're doing the paving, and you brought up the drainage. Now I understand a little bit more of what's going on. Selfishly, I didn't look at the whole length of Route 6. I was looking at the Harwich end of it, and the response from the police and fire as to going out there for many, many crashes, and the backups on 124. So if there was something that could be done as into separating and the ramps doing and being repaired, as according to what your study is finding, the worst ones versus the parts of the road were developed in the 50s, as I understand. Route 6 started in what, 1950s?
Different segments evolved over time, but yep,
Yeah,
some of that
and then between exits 6 and 9, that was done in what, 70s?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
Yes.
It's in our regional transportation plan, but unless Lev knows it off the top of his head. But certainly some time ago for all of those segments.
Yeah. So part of it needs to be brought up to date. I understand the character. People want to keep Cape Cod quaint, but the Cape is still building, and if you look at it as a major highway coming onto the Cape, and then as an evacuation route, which is going to be moot in a couple of years for the power plant anyway, not so for hurricanes. There's needs to improve this, and if we can improve the off-ramps in Harwich, it would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much for your comments. Yes, sir.
Hi, Stan Pastuzak in Harwich. Just a couple of questions. I know the topic is ramps and breakdown lanes, so I won't even ask why we're not considering widening of route exit 9 up through the Rotary. Just one observation. In designing the ramps, I'm looking at the accident detail, and I'm looking at exit 9, which was changed drastically in recent years in terms of that whole on and off ramp and everything. Yet that seems to have one of the highest accident occurrences, not only numbers, but also with injuries. So I don't know.
There's certainly an explanation for that,
Okay.
if you would allow me that.
But,
at
and I will, but just,
Yep.
I'm just saying in designing all of this, there's still issues, I guess, in terms of whether it be the tourist season versus weather, the people, the way they drive, I don't know, but I'll.
And then
thank you.
specifically at exit 9, there's a couple things that contribute to those higher numbers. One being its higher volume than say 10 or 11 in terms of the vehicles coming on and off. And you also have essentially 4 ramps for A and B. So it's a much larger area, much more opportunities for conflicts. And then some of them are related to the lane drop, happening at when you go from 4 lanes down to 2 there. So there's a few more things happening at that location. So overall, the numbers are certainly elevated. There's a whole host of factors. If you're looking at a crash rate, I would say exit 10 and 11 would be higher in terms of a rate.
Oh, okay, thank you.
But great question, thank you.
Hi, Steve. Linda Sybil, I just have a question on when will we see actual plans? Because to ask us whether or not we support improvements to anything is like asking us if we support the American flag. So when will we actually get an opportunity to see that this exit is going to take this much paving, this many trees, is going to impact this water area, et cetera? And when will we have an opportunity to then comment on those very specific plans as opposed to the global, do we support increased safety?
So great question. I'll answer it to the best of my ability, understanding that a lot of it is outside of my control. So we'll certainly provide a little more detail on the draft report here. So you'll see a little more detail, but in terms of the specifics of each location, that would have to wait until a project is advanced by Mass DOT. So it would really be up to them to decide as they move those things forward. What I can say is that if the result of this study is that there is 0 support for extending acceleration and deceleration ramps, that's probably the end of the discussion overall with Mass DOT. They tend to be hesitant on moving forward with a project if there's no community support for it. So while I recognize the challenge of being responsive at this level of information, even a general indication as to whether or not this is something they should be pursuing is helpful for the state to know whether or not they should be investing funds in that further level of design and really getting down to the details. So again, I can't speak for the details in terms of how MassDOT advances it, but the result of this study will help them gauge whether or not they want to move forward to that stage. So, thank you.
Hi, Link Hooper, DPW Director. Steve, do you happen to have the letter that we sent MassDOT about a year ago in your possession?
Not in my possession. We did compile it as part of the study, and it will be included.
Okay, I was looking to read that. I did not bring that with me today. I would just like for the audience and the TV audience to realize that the town of Harwich has acknowledged for some time there's been a problem, particularly with the exit 10 and westbound on-ramp. A year before their paving project, I wrote a letter to the district director, Mary Jo Perry, with the support of the Board of Selectmen, the fire chief, the police chief, traffic safety committee, and I'm sure I'm leaving some people off of that. We actually had our own town engineer do a preliminary design of it. We costed the improvements out. Off the top of my head, I think it was a $70,000 change order to provide, I think, a 1,000-foot acceleration lane from a 400-foot acceleration lane. To say the least, we were extremely disappointed that MassDOT chose to do nothing with that. We got a letter back with a bunch of reasons of why it could not be incorporated, but in advance of the current paving project that they just concluded, we asked for some specific improvements there. I'm very enthusiastic to see they've engaged you to do the public outreach, and hopefully we'll see some action out of it. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. Certainly, we acknowledge the great work the town's been doing to try to move these projects forward and the challenges that they've faced with Mass DOT here. So one result of this study will be very clearly to document these concerns in a report, and then in my experience, Mass DOT is much more amenable to moving things forward if they're well documented. So certainly, we will love to work with the town of Harwich to in the future get some of these changes implemented. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Good morning, I'm Martin Chulak from Orleans. The answer to your questions on the board on the left are yes. We support the improvements to ramps. I don't have specific as far as which are priorities. I think more than not all of them need improvement. Do we support additional paved shoulders? The answer is yes on all segments. But I have other comments I'd like to share. The issue here is safety. And gentleman mentioned he's been driving for 50-some years. I've been driving for 30-some years. There's a couple of questions I have, and number one, we have an issue with people that don't yield. They don't know what the term yield means. Merging is supposed to be regulated using yielding, and unfortunately, I feel that most people need a refresher on how to yield. And I'm very happy to see the law enforcement folks here and really ask them to help us remind people how to yield on a merging lane. The second thing is that people are not using turning signals. And again, this is something that I think people need to be reminded about. When you're merging, I think it's required, isn't it, to use turning signals. Is that correct, gentlemen? Whenever you're changing lanes, you use turning signals. And believe it or not, most people merging, at least from my observations, do not use turn signals merging or changing lanes on Route 6. The third item is tailgating. There is a real serious problem with tailgating on Route 6, not only Route 6, but most roads in the state. And I believe that the tailgating issue is also contributing to accidents areas around interchanges. There's not enough room between. People are trying to slip in between vehicles that are tailgating. They're getting frustrated, and there's accidents causes because of tailgating. Is tailgating an issue, officers? Do you? Always a problem, okay. Fourth thing is speeding. Speed limit on the two-lane section is 55. The speed limit on the four-lane is 60. I generally, 99% of the time, drive the speed limit, and I'm frustrating people behind me because they want to go 65, 70, 75 miles an hour. I get regularly recognized using hand gestures because of the speed that I observe. So speeding is an issue as well, because when you're doing 65 or 70, you obviously can't merge adequately when a 400-foot lane, 400-foot merge lane. So speeding needs to be controlled. And again, I ask our officers, not only here today, but in all of the towns and the state police, to please help people remind them about the speed limit. In fact, I think most of our towns and the cost of these improvements could benefit from the revenue that we could derive from putting out some speeding tickets. We could pay for this project several times over, I believe. The fifth thing is the cell phone usage. People are constantly using the cell phone while they're driving, and this is again a safety issue that needs to be addressed by law enforcement. Okay? And that brings me to the bottom line. I rarely see police on Route 6. And I ask the question, who is responsible for enforcing the laws on Route 6? Is that the town, or is that the state, or is that both?
It's the state police, sir. We respond out there to assist them. We do not enforce speed or traffic
Okay.
violations out there.
Thank you very much. So it's a state responsibility, and we need to start talking to our state representatives to get more enforcement. Now, I have one item to share that happened to me recently, probably within the past 2 or 3 months. I had a gentleman in a pickup truck pass me on the right on a merge lane. Okay? It was at exit 10, and he just whipped around me because I was observing the speed limit. So there's a real issue there that we've got to deal with as far as enforcing. I think if we could handle some of these enforcement issues, we could resolve some of the safety aspects of the ramps, particularly speeding and tailgating. But the answer to your question is yes, we support it, and we'd like to see this work happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Thank you for specifically responding to the questions, then also certainly echo the concerns with driver behavior. Some of the important tenets of traffic safety are, one, engineering, that's what we deal with today, but things you're speaking to, education, enforcement, equally important, and will continue to be going forward. So thank you very much for those comments. I also want to pause before you get into any more questions here. I just want to thank the town of Harwich for hosting us today and for recording the meeting. I also want to thank town staff that have attended, public safety officials that have attended today. We appreciate that. And certainly all members of the public, we appreciate hearing from you today. So I didn't want to go on without forgetting that. But with that, certainly any other comments or questions?
I had a question, I'm sorry. Sometimes when, what, I'm sorry. Sometimes when we are driving on Route 6, my husband and I will see a driver who is just totally reckless, weaving in and out, speeding. And I've thought, well, I guess I could call 911, but I don't know if this is considered something they don't want to be bothered about, or if I should call, because it's obviously somebody who's very dangerous. How does the police department feel about that?
Yeah, if you feel that that's going to result in a traffic crash, that's a 911 call. You'll get routed to the state police. They get calls on erratic operation every day.
Okay,
We would encourage you to call that.
okay.
And just to make sure we got that on the mic, if you do see erratic operation, certainly you can call 911 and let them know. Thank you very much for responding to that. And yes, sir?
My name is Doug Payson. I live in Barnstable Village and I work in Orleans and have commuted for more than 30 years on that road. And first of all, I absolutely support extending the on and off ramp access. Particularly what I'm seeing recently is at exit 8 that the traffic is backing up onto the road in the morning commute, significantly backing up onto Route 6. And I think as time goes on, one of the demographic changes we're seeing on the Cape is as the lower Cape ages and it's a larger and larger elderly population, the people who are servicing those people are coming from the mid and upper Cape and even off Cape. And the traffic at 6:30 in the morning now is very, very heavy of the workers going back and forth that are servicing an elderly population. At the same time, the volume of ambulance calls along Route 6, and it's very, very difficult if you're traveling at a high rate of speed to go on to a dirt shoulder. And in many places, that dirt shoulder is unsafe, so that, you're skidding trying to get off the road. And many times it isn't one ambulance from exit 12 to exit 9, it's 2 or 3. So the number of ambulance calls, and in terms of an enforcement issue, oftentimes people don't pull over for the ambulances. And that's difficult. And perhaps with a paved shoulder, they would be more likely to pull over. It would be safer. And one other thing that I would like to add is the ATV access to Route 6. And particularly if you're traveling east on Route 6 from exit 9, and as you dip down where the Herring River is, there's a track that's worn in 3 or 4 feet into the ground. And I've seen those ATVs in the traffic when there's traffic on the highway and they're weaving in and out of cars. I believe that at a number of points all along Route 6 that the access for ATVs and mini bikes needs to be blocked to keep the people out of the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of those comments. And I do want to also make sure that folks at home, if you're interested in commenting, you weren't able to make it to this meeting or the meeting tomorrow evening, certainly other ways to get in touch with us. We certainly want to hear from you. Email, phone, we're always available to listen. It looks like we have some more comments here today. Yes.
Yes, I'm Steve Buckley from Chatham, and I have a question kind of along that line. People had asked what the next steps were, and you had addressed like when construction might happen, but I'm wondering, you know, if you take our feedback and do something with it and analyze it and pass it on to Mass DOT, will we be able to see what was passed on? I mean, some of the comments, I guess it'd be nice to see the individual comments as opposed to a summary of all of them, and so people can see what happened to their particular. That's one way to engage and make people feel like they're really being listened to, is to see where their comment went and so forth, and that it wasn't just thrown into a big bucket.
Absolutely, and
Okay.
that is our intention. As many of you here have noticed, we've been taking detailed notes today, so we will be putting together a detailed list of all the comments we heard today, as well as those that have been coming in by email and phone, and that will be included as part of the report submitted to Mass DOT. So you'll be able to see that everything that was said today will be directly passed on to Mass DOT for their consideration going forward, because we do want to make sure that these comments are properly carried along, so thank you for that.
Great. This kind of relates, I guess, to what the previous gentleman was talking about, the fact that people don't know how to merge. And so we could design a highway that's perfect with, you know, if we had all the money in the world, there would, if people were still unaware, let's say, you know, if certainly there are people who disregard the rules of the road, and but then there are people who are just plain unaware that, I'm supposed to yield to traffic, or just because I put on my blinker doesn't mean they have to let me in, which, based on my almost 50 years of driving, not quite as much as the other gentleman here, but I did the math and I went, oh, okay, yeah, almost 50 years of driving. I grew up in Chatham, got my motorcycles driver's license when I was 16, which means you don't need anybody on a motorcycle to ride with you. You can basically have you can't give anybody a ride on the back, but I was able to start driving anywhere on my motorcycle at 16. So anyway, observing the rules of the road from that time on. Also, in my adult life, spending 25 years commuting around the Washington, D.C. area, so I've got a good idea, and I-95. And so anyway, my observation is that over the course of that time, it's gotten worse as far as the people's behavior as far as merging goes, that it's gotten, now it's gotten to the point, I guess I was amazed when I moved back to Cape Cod about 15 years ago, was that we'd be driving along on, you know, like near exit 10, let's say, going towards Hyannis, and people are coming on, and they're merging, and we're all going west. And but I saw that people who had the right of way on the highway were slowing down to let people in. Okay, you're being courteous. Okay, you know, but it was getting to the point where people would stop. You know, you're going along, no traffic, so to speak, flowing along, but then somebody comes in to merge onto the highway, and effectively you go from the speed limit, 55, down to 30. Like, why are we stopping all of a sudden? And it's just to let a person in. And I think part of it is, or I think the major thing is that people think, oh, they have their blinker on, they expect to come over, I know what's going to happen, I'm trying to be a defensive driver, and let them in. So, and sometimes you'll have, both people could be the courteous driver. No, and then it becomes, after you, no, after you, no, after you, after you. And it's kind of like, because of this confusion now, neither one of the drivers knows who's going to go. The other example, of course, is where you have two people, neither one of who want to give up, and they're both jockeying for position. And at the same time, it's the same thing. No, I have the right of way. No, you have to let me in. So, and that's not something that a yield sign will solve, as we've seen. There are yield signs at every one of these things. I think they're on the wrong side of the road, but well, I'll get to that in a second. But, so you could have it perfectly, but even with perfect signage and yield signs all over the place and warning lights or whatever it is, the physical design of the highway won't make up for the fact that people will think, oh, well, they always let me in, or they're used to driving there in the habit. And so until somebody stops them and says, and gives them a ticket to do that, they're not going to change, the signage is not going to change their behavior. So that's what I would point out, is that I think the Registry of Motor Vehicles that puts out a driving manual, and I looked at when my now grown children were getting their licenses about 15 years ago, I was going over it with them and helping them, quiz them to pass the test and so forth. And I saw that what it has there is like, there's a section on driving defensively. So it says, yes, everybody should yield, you know, the right of way. Yeah, there's the right of way, but oh, if somebody, but you can look it up in there. It says, the right of way is something you give, not take. Okay, but it's like, but if I have the right of way, you read all these different things, and it says, when in doubt, basically it says, give it up. But what that makes is that the bullies know this, and even subconsciously, just like I said, just think, oh, they have to get, if everybody scatters and gets out of the way as I'm merging, then why should I change things? So I think there's a mismatch here, and I think the Registry of Motor Vehicles needs to be involved to say, because if we're telling people that there's such thing as a right of way, and you're telling them that the right of way is negotiable every time there's a merge, then that's the disconnect. They need to be in the room so that one parent isn't telling the kid one thing and another parent's telling the mother, and the kid's going, oh, I'll decide which one I want to do, you know, that type of thing. So I think they should be part of that conversation. And the other part is that with the yield signs, of course, signage does help, is that when anyone's coming around and they're looking to see and getting ready to merge, like using the exit 10 example, getting ready to go to going westbound, and you're looking to over your left shoulder to see, like, or even, not even, I use my mirror when it gets to that point, but when you're like coming around and you're looking to see, and you're starting to see how much traffic is in there, whether it's all backed up or whether there's no cars at all, and you get a sense of, oh, okay, things seem to be moving, so I'm going to get ready to step on the gas and go up to speed, and then look in my mirror. But your field of vision is on your left here. So any signage that tells you, hello, you need to yield. You're going to be merging, yes, I know that, but just a reminder, you are going to yield, not them.
Great.
But the thing is, the sign is over here on your right in the bushes. So you're going like this, your field of vision is concentrating over here. That's where the yield sign should be at the last second. Oh yes, by the way, you're going to yield, and not over here. So it's virtually invisible. In fact, I had to go back and look at the Google Streets. So you go to Google Streets, and I had to refresh my memory so I would know. And I went and I looked at all last night just to be sure that I knew what I was talking about. Sure enough, it's over there on the right, where I had never noticed it before, because I was always looking for the yield over here. And I thought, oh, they're not there. There's no yield signs. Oh, it's over here. So anyway, that was the thing. So, but even with all the yield signs in the world, I think Registry of Motor Vehicle needs to be brought in to that. Okay. So,
Thank you very much for those comments. Looks like we have another comment.
One of the previous speakers talked about exit 8 backing up onto the highway. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that we had a very similar circumstance down here at Route 124, particularly when the town had a four-way stop down here. We put a TIP project, a transportation improvement project, in through the Cape Cod Commission in partnership with Mass DOT. And that project, although a small intersection at Queen Anne Route 124, the signalization is about $1 million project. Usually these things have a 5 to 7 year window from inception to construction. That thing moved up to about 3 years from when we originally proposed it. Small project, so it could be more flexible in the scheduling. But Mass DOT realized there was a problem with traffic backing up onto the highway, negatively affecting safety because of this intersection, and assisted us and partnered with us and moved it up. So sometimes when they realize there is a problem, they have partnered with various towns and communities and stepped up and made things happen in a very timely fashion. And that intersection costs the taxpayers of Harwich $0, believe it or not. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And there's looks like another comment.
Lake, thank you very much for that, and you're right on. However, there is a particular sensitivity to the response timeframes from Mass DOT. And I'll use this as one example. Another one is the replacements for the Bourne and Sagamore bridges. How long is it going to take before those are done? Will I see it in my lifetime? Another one is the transportation planning that goes around the whole area of Hyannis, and how long is that taken? Yes, some things do get accelerated because of a need. We have needs elsewhere that don't seem to be getting responded to in a timely fashion. Hence my question first on, and someone also followed up with the timeliness of this in terms of response to Mass DOT, and when can we see something tangible from it? Just to reinforce our sensitivity we have regarding responses, how fast they happen, and how slowly the perception is this whole process works. Thank you.
Absolutely. Great points. We certainly acknowledge the challenge of a big organization like Mass DOT dealing with 351 communities trying to respond to each individual one. But I will say that when we have a final report, certainly advocacy at the town level is what gets action often. So look forward to continued dialogue from both elected officials and members of the public. So this is an important part of it. Thank you.
We went to a meeting in Barnstable last week about the new bridge construction. DOT sent people, and the Corps of Engineers had people. They wouldn't answer questions. They just were taking comments, which I don't think was as effective as your presentation. But if this goes through and the bridge project's going through, are you going to work together so that everything will flow smoothly and not need to be torn apart after it's done?
So certainly to the extent that we're involved in these conversations, that would be our goal. Certainly there's players outside. We don't have control over what the Army Corps does, for example, but absolutely we're involved in all the discussions, and what you stated in terms of trying to avoid some of that rockiness is exactly what we will be trying to do.
They also said that by July they will be ready for another town meeting and present some plans to us then, so I'm going to hold them to that and put it on my calendar. And your problem with people not yielding is that road rage has replaced common courtesy. I see it so often, and I don't know what to do about that, but it's not good.
Well, thank you very much. I know folks have a busy day,
Almost
so
the-
we'll have one more brief comment. And
Brief,
and then I'll,
yep.
let you guys-
Just on the, related to the bridge
Yep.
project, I mean, if the bridges are modernized so that they handle 50% more traffic, then certainly that will, we're all downstream of that. So if the floodgates are open, yes, the idea that a regional plan, and I did notice that Steve spoke there, and I do believe you said something about a regional, asking them to look at a regional thing, because up until now, if you went to, I went to the meetings too, they were talking about a study area, and it was all around the canal. And so the idea is that, yes, until they expand it to say, wait a minute, there's going to be things that, so there is, I think the commission is prodding Mass DOT and the Corps of Engineers to broaden the study. And so if we all, people down Cape from the canal, remind them of that, then that would be the main thing, because otherwise they'll just concentrate on traffic congestion around the canal, when that's what it's been so far. So, and that, yeah, they're going to come out with something next summer. And yes, in yesterday's paper, Mass DOT's secretary kind of jumped the gun and said, well, I want the wider bridges where 50%, she didn't say 50% more traffic, but 6-lane divided. And so she's talking about her goal this and her goal that. It's kind of like I said, she's kind of jumping the gun there. So that's, but you can see which way the wind's blowing on that. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you very much, and since you teed me up for this, like, you're remiss if I didn't mention the Cape Cod Regional Transportation Plan. That is a plan for the entire Cape Cod region. Commission staff will be updating that this spring, so there'll be a host of public meetings and listening sessions during that process, and that's an opportunity for the region to very clearly articulate what the region's vision for the transportation system is. So certainly we'll be advertising those meetings as we did with these meetings, and we'll certainly encourage folks to get involved. It really is a policy statement for the region. This is what we would like to see. So certainly encourage folks to get involved with that. With that, I'd like to close. Again, thank everyone for attending. Thank you for the town for hosting. If there are any other questions, we'll stay after and answer specific questions. Thank you.